as you were listening?
If there was a recommended book that would have information about the different plants for fitting into the different guilds. I'm a complete beginner, so yeah, where there might be information about plants, whether they're edible or whether how their roots are, and that kind of picture.
Very good.
Yeah, so. I had one about when he's talking about not cramping things up by trying to fit all 7 guilds, and I hadn't heard that before. Maybe could he talk a bit about spacing and stuff, because I tend to plant more in the traditional style with really a lot of separation, and then weeds and everything do come in. But how close is gonna not stunt the plants?
Are you able to hear these questions, Thomas?
Yeah.
So we also had a bit of a conversation around where to source perennial plants from as well, particularly perennial vegetables.
Lovely. So there's something about sourcing, where to begin, the different types of guilds, spacing.
So in the group I was in,
yeah,
it was quite interesting because well, it was very interesting because Joe has 30 years experience of designing permaculture forest gardens, and Laura has started a project. I think Laura, you said Dumfries?
Yes.
And has a blank canvas, so to speak. And I'm the opposite, where I've taken on forest with an orchard that's been long neglected. So my question would be not so much where to start, but how to almost, what do I need to remove to help that forest look after itself? Because things like the root systems, are they conflicting with each other? Are they, you know, looking after each other? Because everything is happily overgrown and rewilded. So I would need a different approach, as in I'm not starting from the beginning, but I am at the beginning of a long established project.
Thanks, Paula. Should we give Thomas a chance to answer that clutch of questions, and then we can go to more? You're muted, Thomas.
Question. So a couple of questions will probably come answered, and also by me showing an example of a small-scale forest garden with a couple of guilds in it. I think that might be useful in terms of people getting a picture of, like, how do I apply this? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll share the screen again. So here's, so you've seen this picture before. This was at the beginning of the presentation. So first impression really is kind of, it looks good, you know. So somebody's really, like Jenny, who made this guild in Lancaster in her back garden, she's really got a handle on the spacing of the plants. And that was the question that somebody asked, you know, it's like, how do you do that? And so each plant will have different spacing initially. Obviously, most plants start off as like a very small, thin thing, but they will tend to have a natural like size that they end up as. Martin Crawford's book, like both his books, like on creating a forest garden and the one on perennial vegetables, they're both very good on giving like rough indication of the spacing. So that's one thing I would recommend. So if we're zooming in on kind of what's actually in that guild, let's have a look. So we've got, in fact, you're looking at 2 guilds here, one around the plum tree, one around an apple tree. And so in terms of designing a guild, it's generally worth starting with the highest layer. So in this case, the highest layer are small trees. So underneath that, you've got a space for a few shrubs and then ground cover, you know, but you can leave out the shrub layer and can go straight to the ground cover as well. It's allowed. So in this case, underneath, we've got a rose bush, which, you know, like Jenny planted because she as you can see, kind of she likes the aesthetic quality. You know, it's like she wants a lot of flowers throughout the year for herself, also for insects. That rose also is a variety that has good hips at the end of the year. You know, so like it gives you beauty, gives insects life, and it gives you food at the end of the season as well. And then other plants we've got here is like this big patch of lemon balm at the front. And lemon balm is a plant that grows in a clump and kind of slowly grows outwards, you know, and so you can, in a way, contain it by just hacking away at the sides. And then oregano, there's another clump here, and that goes more like moves by runners. So you have to keep a bit of an eye on that. But lemon balm is quite vigorous and can cope with that competition, you know, so it doesn't mind. And then growing through and out of those kind of are several like taller, thinner plants. There's Linaria, which actually is, I think it's a self-seeder. So it will have been there at the beginning, and then each year it just like drops seeds. And if there's a bit of a gap, then it will fill that gap and grow through that. It's quite a good idea to have like self-seeding plants in a forest garden guild. Just chuck them in at the beginning, because whenever a plant fails or dies or goes weaker, one of those self-seeders hopefully will come up and take that space rather than some random weed. Then Aquilegia or Columbine, that's a deep-rooted plant, deep tap-rooted plant, so that will bring up nutrients from below. Will anchor the soil as well. And then the Salsify, which is another self-seeding, yet deep-rooted plant. I mean, the root is sometimes eaten, but also the flowers, the whole plant really can be eaten. And it's very beautiful as well, and it's a self-seeder. So it's different growing strategies in there. There's different rooting types in there. So like just moving 2 meters to the left from this picture, we've got a path going through the middle, and that path separates the apple and plum guild to the right that we've just seen from 2 other guilds to the left. So just like the axis actually helps us define where which guild is, you know, so that is, if you're starting, it's a good idea to break up the site, even if it's just like 6 by 10 meters like this one, to break it into smaller patches, and then you can design each patch individually rather than having to think about the whole garden. You know, so that makes your life much easier, especially if you're new to the subject. So as you can see, there's like some other plants in here as well. I mean, you see again so there's rosemary, there's poached eggplant, which is a excellent ground cover, again annual but very vigorous, so it can, we'll see it in a different picture in a little bit. It's can like just by itself function as a ground cover quite well. And just like zooming in a bit more on the micro level here, so that's kind of, you're seeing the Aquilegia again that we saw in the first picture. The Columbine is there in the background, and right next to us there's some perennial onions, again tall stems, but very small root system, a bulb, and kind of going down, so they don't take much space, and alliums are great for that, you know, actually filling, like just shove them in the gaps, you know, kind of, and they will grow through. And then there's a yarrow, which is like a spreading, underground spreading root system, so that takes up a slightly different space to all the plants we mentioned so far. So there's diversity, the diversity underground going on as well. And then ice plant, which is a nice, juicy, succulent, late flowering plant. So that gives us, that gives the insects something to feed on later in the season as well. So we've got, you see that diversity in over time in terms of like seasonal flowering patterns. You see the different root patterns underground, you see the different layers. So the next quick pictures I wanted to show is just like how that guild was developed. So over just 5 minutes, over 3 pictures. So this is the whole thing at the very beginning. So you see how Jenny has divided the space up into 5 different patches, you know, so in each patch she designs individually, you know, so like making it much easier to understand what goes on. Also, that gives us a chance to like play with the soil conditions. So in the top left here, she actually added acidic soil because she wanted like plants like blueberries and sorrels and like acid loving plants. So by doing that kind of subdivision, you give yourself opportunities to play with like the characteristics of the landscape as well. 18 months later, it looks like this, you know, so at this point, after 2 years, like a year and a half, you don't really see much of the shrubs yet. You see that rose bush here. You see that there's the apple tree here just coming up, but they're still more or less just sticks in the ground. You know, you can hardly see the plum. But you see that the herb layer really has already taken off, you know, and so that's something you want to achieve, whatever ground you clear. Ideally, within 1 season, you want to have that covered on the ground, you know, and there's a whole workshop like this going to be happening on ground cover. So I won't say too much about that, but like for successful forest gardens, that's really something to stress. Make sure that you cover the ground within 1 season, whatever you clear, grow it within 1 season. And this is another picture of the same garden in year 8, I think. And at this point, the trees, you can see them here. And because they're semi-dwarfing trees, they're pretty much established their full size at that point. So within just 8 years, you have that full forest feeling to it, you know. So it's kind of interesting to see that kind of at that point, of course, like a lot of the annuals, they had chard in there, they had like a few other vegetables in there. Of course, they're long gone, but some of the annuals, like the Linaria, are still hanging on. So that's one example of a small-scale forest garden, how that can pan out. I'll just show 2 or 3 other pictures of like polyculture guilds that look quite different and look much simpler actually. So here's one which is a 3 species polyculture really. So we've got a linear Bramley apple hedge at the back here, and with 3 different currants in keyhole beds, and then that poached eggplant that we saw a glimpse of in the back there. And here it's really taken over the entire ground layer, and it's excellent for insects, you know, so it's brilliant bee fodder. It's self-seeds, so you don't really have to worry about it like year in, year out, even though it's an annual, it will come back, no problem. And it really pushes out any weeds that you might have to worry about. And it looks quite pretty as well. So top plant. I am trying to get to the next page here. Yes, so here's a 2-layer polyculture. So trees, fruit trees, and fruit bushes. You know, and again, Rachel, who's developed that, she's got quite a large site, and she really wanted that forest feel to it. You know, so she just planted lots of fruit bushes, fruit trees, other wilder trees as well, and she didn't really worry about the understory, and she doesn't really have about the herb layer, and she doesn't really have to, because the trees and shrubs are planted so densely that not much can grow underneath, and what can is easily pulled out, like nettles and so on. And then she just hacks paths in amongst that, you know. And so it's another option. Or you can have a much clearer, much more defined spaces like this, which is a botanical garden in Denmark, who are experimenting with forest garden guilds. And so here's kind of that's really the idea of a grove, you know, so where you have tall trees and the ground cover layer and nothing in between really. And that can work really well, especially for nuts, you know, kind of Dave Jack in North America, he's kind of advocating that sort of habitat for like growing nuts, because they can fall on the ground, you can pick them easily, especially if you've got some plants on the ground layer that will grow early in the season and then have already died back, like when the nuts fall. In this case, I think we had kind of more like wild strawberries, we had mint in there, we had some allium in there. So that's just like a 3 or 4 species ground layer under a canopy of 3 trees, you know, so a very simple pattern. And if you're going bigger, like agroforestry scale, you know, and commercial scale, then simplicity actually is your friend, you know, because you don't want to spend too much time harvesting and like working out what to harvest at what time in any one guild. So it makes sense to simplify things. Right, so finally, little like salad vegetable guild here, which is Graham Bell's garden in Scotland. We've got sorrel, we've got chives, we've got parsley in there, so some self-seeded stuff as well. We've got perennial onions again. So a vegetable polyculture can be just like a 2-layer affair as well, and on a fairly small scale. Great, so that's just a few examples of like how that guild concept, that polyculture concept can be applied. So with which I will hand it back to Paul, and yeah, rein us in, but just I want to finish with these 2 quotes, which just kind of hopefully help you relax about the concept a bit. That kind of Martin Crawford says, most things grow quite well with most things. I've been mixing up things like as I wanted to. And Graham Bell says, the forest garden on the whole is the guild. So try to choose things that don't outcompete each other, combine complementary niches rather than worry about specific species. So that's the advice from the masters, you know, and so that's, yeah, all I wanted to share for now, but yeah, let's see what time we've got for questions.
Thanks so much, Thomas. If you stop your share, we can get back to seeing each other.
Here we are.
Lovely. So you've heard the potted decades of experience coming through there. And there, of course, are many of you who've got lots of experience yourselves. So maybe it's a chance for you guys who know this stuff pretty well yourselves, also to add to what Thomas has been sharing. So any existing forest gardeners, please do speak up about guilds.
Or also any questions. And additionally, at this point, if Richard has been harvesting anything from the chat,
yeah, good,
to throw in, then that's great. Richard, do you want to throw in anything from the chat?
Thanks for the reminder, Hannah. Yeah.
Yeah. So just much of the questions have been answered. So there's 2 here, perhaps that might be expanded upon or touched upon. So Vicky asks how to increase soil microflora, and Alice was interested to know where to source perennial veg, and said perhaps we could form a group. But she asked, are there any where to source and what about networks doing that? So two questions I think that are answered in the chat box.
Right.
Yes, but
so
we can't see the chat box once we close down, and it all disappears too fast.
You should be able to, if you go to the little chat icon in the middle of your toolbar at the bottom.
Yes, yeah, but once we shut down, then you can't read through it quick enough, and it all disappears, doesn't it? How do you get to see it after the event?
I will save the chat.
Good man.
You can actually save it yourself as well.
Ah, okay.
Thank you. That's great.
So soil microflora, shall I?
Yeah, go for that, Thomas. I was going to say, others could also will have their view if you have experience, but yeah,
absolutely,
Thomas, you have a first stab.
Yeah, so soil microflora, basically keep the ground covered to stop it drying out. That will help. And the forest garden kind of course, does that generally. Keep the ground open, and the roots of the forest garden should be doing that. So if you have especially that diverse root pattern, those diverse root patterns that open the ground deeply and also hold it open at the top. And yeah, just like feed it organic matter. And again, like if you have biomass plants within the forest garden, then you always have mulch to keep it mulching, you know. And so those are 3 strategies. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of experienced people here in the room, so let's maybe hear from some of them. Silence.
Yeah, in terms of guilds, I have a bit more of a slightly different strategy. I basically really think through all the, as you said, you know, the time diversity. So I'm looking at what I mainly do is I mainly put the tree at the center, and I think, what are the tree's needs? So it's going to need nitrogen, it's going to need potassium. So what are the nitrogen fixing plants, trees, shrubs, etc.? What are the potassium accumulating plants? So what are the deep tap-rooted things that will bring up the different micronutrients? But then I think about the season that the tree itself needs to be pollinated. So so what I want to make sure a month before my apple tree's buds open, I've got hundreds of flowers already. So what plants can I have that are really, really, really early flowering? And how do I in other words, how do I make sure there's already insects there? I also make sure that I have insect habitat, so lots of logs and twigs and branches, and I make like little ponds, but they're not really a pond, it's more mud, little mud flats in little places to make sure there's moisture for all the different bees, the like mason bees, etc., so they can build their nests and whatnot. So there's a lot more thought that we can put into the guilds than just some of the basics that you see a lot of. But the thing that I would absolutely echo were Graham's words insofar as, you know, and I can't remember who the first quote was from, but I'm totally right. Really be easy. You know, nature wants to grow. All plants want to grow. All you need to do is start talking to them, understanding them, finding out what is it that each plant wants, what is it that's going to really allow it to thrive and really be happy, and just put it in the right place. Put it in with other things that are going to support it to be happy and alive, and you'll have a really amazing story, you know, really amazing forest garden, because everything wants to live in it. It'll be dynamic, it will move, it will grow. So yeah, don't get too worried. Have I put the right thing in the right place? Nature will work it out for you.
Thanks, Rakesh.
The sourcing of perennials was a question. Well, there are some easy options. So there are some specialist nurseries around. I think kind of Martin Crawford is the best known one. I would say that a lot of plants you will find in generic nurseries as ornamentals. So that's always worth looking at that. So if you're looking through Martin Crawford's book, again, kind of that would be my reference book, or Plants for a Future. And then look up those plants in your local nursery, in your local garden center, you know. So, and basically like make sure they grow them themselves rather than import them from Holland. And then you could have a like very locally sourced, locally adapted plant there. Other people's gardens, great place, like swapping with other people, you know. So actually, because every plant makes surplus, every plant like recreates, you know, reproduces. And so once you started a forest garden, you will soon have surplus plants to swap with others. And then there's the wild, you know, so because a lot of the plants that work well in a forest garden also work in a wild environment. And some of them, as people have already mentioned, will come in by themselves without you even asking. I mean, in our place, there's always ground elder, and you know, kind of I take it out where I want to plant other things, but there's no point trying to eradicate it, and I can eat it. You know, it makes a nice curry. It makes nice spinach-like food, you know, and so it's kind of it's a great plant to have. And there are many other semi-wild or wild plants that we can integrate.
Thanks, Thomas. Richard, do shout if you're seeing anything more from the chat. Any further questions?
Is ground elder okay for salad? Somebody asked. It is. It's quite a strong one, and kind of a lot of those kind of wild plants, you might want to throw a few in a salad, but not loads, because they might just overpower things.
Do you go for the really young leaves with ground elder, or are old tough ones also nice?
I wouldn't generally kind of with leaf crops. What I find, I mean, there's a pattern. There seems to be a pattern that once a plant goes to flower, oftentimes the seed, the leaves become either tough or impalatable or bitter or too sharp, you know, because the plant at that point is focused on getting like over the finishing line, you know, it's basically getting from flower to seed, and it doesn't want to get eaten at that point. So it will often produce substances that put off the herbivores, including us.
Thank you.
There's a couple of questions in the chat. One about advice for guilds suitable for boggy ground, and another one about how to build guilds if you acquire somewhere that already has mature full-size fruit trees. So those are two things that are in the chat.
That's something that's actually the case in our place, and I've been really enjoying kind of I'm thinking about it as retrofitting orchards, really, you know, and so that where there are big mature trees that already have a lot of shade under them, then it's quite easy to have shade lovers. I mean, in our case, wild garlic, you know, just you pop a seed in, and like 2 years later you have a patch, you know, and so wild garlic is a brilliant one for like established orchards. We also have in our place meadowsweet grows really well, and so when I mow the orchard, I always look, are there plants that I want to keep? Are there plants that want to go? So lemon balm self-seeds itself. I use the scythe, and I don't cut the lemon balm, I cut the grasses around it, so it will spread. Similar with the meadowsweet, similar with yarrow. And then there are like the volunteers, like wood avens is a small herb of the rose family. It's not particularly tasty, but it makes a really good ground cover. So does ground ivy, you know, and so I encourage the plants that are already coming in, and then just augment that with stuff that, I mean, I plant mint in there, I plant kind of more yarrow in there, and ice plant, and so on, the things that I like to eat. So basically partly following what nature's already doing, partly just kind of small interventions that steer it in the direction that I want it to go. So mowing, like selective mowing with a scythe, I can recommend.
Thank you, Thomas. We're at our time boundary, so I'm going to hand back to Hannah, who's been curating this series. So do, if you'd like to express any appreciations to Thomas and to your co-participants through the chat. Hannah, over to you to close.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing, and thanks for everyone else who also shared questions or thoughts or ideas, either in the breakout rooms or here. Obviously, Rakesh sharing knowledge again, which is great, amazing. Yeah, so this is an 8-week series. We have more to go. They were sold out. I freed up some more tickets today, so there may be some more tickets. We're recording everything anyway, so anything you can't get into, you should be able to get the recording of. We should circulate the recording from this in the next few days. And tomorrow you'll also get a follow-up email with a feedback form in case you want to give any feedback. In the email, it's also going to have the Facebook page, the Twitter page, and also a link to our website and a link to donate in case you want to donate anything for the content and for the webinars and for the things that have been going on. But yeah, all in all, thanks everyone. Thanks particularly to Thomas and I hope that you all enjoyed it. And yeah, please do get in touch, give any feedback, and hopefully see you all next week or in one of the other ones.
And Hannah, just one small plug for our membership. If you'd like to join us for a very, 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 very small fee, you'd be most welcome. That's what supports us in doing more of this stuff. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Off to clap for our carers then.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Bye all.
Bye.